This is Tommy's Outdoors 104. This episode is a long time coming because today we're going to talk about MPAs. MPAs, for those of you who don't know, are marine protected areas, which seems to be the only way we can protect the oceans in the 21st century. Our guests today is a bunch of scientists. I think it's an episode we never had so many guests at once in the episode. So our guests are Naomi Wilson, Anuschka Miller, and Alex Callaway, and they're going to introduce Project MarPAMM. Project MarPAMM is a cross-border project that is aimed at recommending management techniques and monitoring of marine protected areas. And obviously, we're going to talk, this is a very short description of what Project MarPAMM is. It is so much more. And we're going to talk about this in this episode. I just want to point out how important it is to have those cross-border projects like MarPAMM, because as we know, wildlife doesn't care about our little national borders. They just live in the geographical regions. So it's super important so that those concepts and those projects and marine protected areas are cross-border and are consistently managed. Okay, enough of that. You will hear much more in just in a second. And as usual, before I let you enjoy this episode of Tommy's Outdoors podcast, if you want to support the podcast, the biggest thing you can do is to recommend that podcast and share it with your friends and colleagues and anyone who is interested in what we're talking about here in the podcast, in this episode, and in general in Tommy's Outdoors. And now you can also buy me a coffee. buymeacoffee.com/Tommy's Outdoors. Link is in the description of the show. You can get in there and make sure I have enough caffeine to keep bringing you those episodes and keep recording them and keep editing them and uploading. So that's it. And now, ladies and gentlemen, without any further ado, Project MarPAMM with Naomi Wilson, Anuschka Miller, and Alex Callaway. Okay, folks, welcome to the Tommy's Outdoors. It's great to have you all on the podcast today.
Thank you.
Tommy, thanks for having us.
It's a pleasure. Folks, since there's quite a good crowd on the podcast today, I think it's only fair to start with a round of introductions. So maybe
You can start with the token gentleman if you want, Alex.
Yeah, gentleman's generous, but yeah. So I'm Alex Callaway. I'm the project coordinator for the MarPAMM project and the seabed mapping leader, AFBI. So those two roles tie in to deliver various parts of the MarPAMM project. Go for Naomi next then.
Okay, I am Naomi Wilson and I'm the project manager for MarPAMM.
And I'm Anuschka Miller. I am involved. I'm not working in Northern Ireland. I'm based at the Scottish Association for Marine Science, where I do science communication. So I'm involved with the communications of this project. So I am one of these dangerous people that probably have an overview, but not a huge amount of depth in the different topics. So I'm really a little bit like you, Tommy, constantly finding out what people are doing in on this project, all about marine protected areas.
I was gonna say that. It sounds a little bit like me. Fantastic. So, folks, we're today here to talk about the MarPAMM project. So maybe, first things first. What is MarPAMM project? What's the goal? What you're doing as a part of that project?
Naomi, do you want to get started?
Okay. The MarPAMM project is really putting together both science and stakeholder opinions and desires for what they want done on marine protected areas in their regions, and in Northern Ireland to site-specific regions. So really, we are going out there and asking communities and people involved in the protected area regions what they would like to help them protect the areas, to give them a sense of ownership of what is occurring and what the statutory bodies in the regions are doing to protect these areas. And we are also doing a lot of science on seabirds and benthic habitats, cetaceans and seals, and some coastal erosion models, and we're merging the two together to generate benefit maps and story maps, and creating management plans at the end of the project to present to the regional statutory bodies to say, this is what the local communities want, this is what the science is showing from these regions, this is what we recommend needs to be done.
Yeah, I think the important thing is to understand that protected areas on land have a lot longer history than in the sea. And we know the land a lot better than we know the sea. So there is quite a strong desire in the society at large, I think, by politicians, to really effectively protect parts of our ocean. People have strong views about that. But how we do that, actually, because wanting to is one thing, being able to do that effectively is quite another. And that means we actually need to know an awful lot about the sea in order to protect them. If you don't know how a species lives or where it lives or how many of them are there, you can't protect them, and you don't know if what you're doing to protect them works. So a lot of what the MarPAMM project is about is trying to backfill some of that missing knowledge, but then also protecting the sea is such a different environment to the land. For one thing, people don't live there. The police isn't there if it's kind of being not adhered to strictly. So can you actually enforce it? So in very many ways, we are working with the communities to make sure that the communities that live by the sea understand the protection measures that may be brought in, but are also in favor of them because they've been part of designing them in. So I think that's a really important part of understanding the overall purpose of what that project's all about, what we're trying to achieve.
Yeah, sure. And so this is very important that it's not only science element of it, but also engagement within communities. Before I ask a follow-up question on this, maybe for, again, kind of to set a scene for listeners who may not be completely familiar with what MPAs are, or like, could you explain the concept of MPAs? What are marine protected areas, and do we have any at the moment? Is it like completely new concept? Like, how does it work?
Alex, do you want to?
Yeah, I'll jump in. MPAs are marine protected areas, and they come under a whole different range of guises. So whilst the UK was still part of the EU, then we'd conform to EU guidelines around certain types of MPA designations, and then each nation within the UK, each devolved nation has responsibility for setting up their own types of MPAs as well. So in England, those are marine conservation zones, alongside special areas of conservation, special protected areas, sites for special scientific interest. In Scotland, those are nature conservation, marine protected areas. And in the Republic of Ireland, there will be, they're not quite as far along, but they'll be very similar to the marine conservation zones, which are set up independently of the EU process. And in Northern Ireland, the same. We've got marine conservation zones and a whole range of different past designations following the EU kind of guidelines. So the idea is that an MPA, under whichever guise it takes, is set up to focus on a species or an environment which is sensitive to human pressures, but is also ecologically important in some way. So the idea is to retain those factors, those elements of the marine environment for future generations. And to do that, we either have an effort to maintain things in the status quo, or efforts to improve them. So the idea is that an MPA just gives a focus for the monitoring and management, which is what MarPAMM is, Marine Protected Area Monitoring and Management. And that allows specific areas for conservation to be, I guess, separated in some way from areas where wider use of the marine environment goes on. But the whole of the UK marine environment is covered by the UK Marine Strategy, so there can be wider protections if deemed necessary, and the wider European seas are covered by the Marine Strategy Framework Directive. So there's all these different options for protection and conservation and management, and the MPAs just provide a focus for those efforts because you can't monitor and manage everywhere all at once.
I think a lot of people always think that protected areas, everything is protected in them and you are not allowed to do anything in them. And that, I think, is important to understand is not the case. You protect an area for a certain species or habitat, as Alex just said. And that means it is only activities that affect those that you need to manage. And it doesn't mean that they get prohibited. It might just be that you kind of say, well, at this time, the species lays its eggs or has young. At that time, just like when you go shooting, there's certain seasons where you're not allowed to do something, or where you kind of say you can keep on doing this, but you've got to find a different method of doing it. So it's important to understand that there are some MPAs that are no-take zones and complete, but I think they are very, very, very limited, and they're certainly not the norm. The other important thing to understand, I think, is that we'll be talking very much on a small local scale, and then we have here with our project, we look at national and cross-border kind of management kind of arrangements, but it really fits into a very large international kind of efforts, because the UN, for its, the sustainability goals, the development goals, they kind of want to see about 30% of the seabed kind of protected in one form or another on a global kind of level. And some really big MPAs have been set up around Antarctica and so on as well, which will function again differently. There's lots of different legal kind of frameworks. Alex already kind of showed how complicated this all can be, but that's legalese. That's for people that work in this. But for the general public to understand is that we are doing something that really the entire world's come together as saying is important to happen. And we are all learning how to do this. So some countries are a bit further ahead. They've been doing it for longer, but we all face different challenges, and so it's somewhere where there is a lot of learning going on. And that is why projects like MarPAMM are being funded, so that we can do that learning and do that learning in a consistent kind of manner and in a scientific kind of manner. Yeah,
you kind of answered already partially questions that I was going to ask, because we heard about the marine, especially I heard in the Republic of Ireland about marine protected areas. In theory, there is marine protected area, but then the bottom trawling is going on, like all the fishing activities are going on, and then environmental NGOs go ahead and it's like, well, that's it's only on paper. There's no protection going on in there.
Yes, and that there is many aspects in this. For one thing, is a protection area. In order to know how they work, it takes a long time. To protect a species needs a huge amount of knowledge. And just saying we are prohibiting everything may not have any consequence that you want. You've got to really know where a species is, where it's coming, how it's moving, and we know. Still, I'm a marine biologist, and I'm always shocked to know how little we do know about species still, because it takes a lot of time. And so one thing I think with MPAs that we have to understand is that it will take time until we have really effective MPAs, because we are learning. We are still really learning. And the other thing is, as you said, if there is an MPA, but it isn't protected for something on the seabed, for example, or where only a small area of it is, then other activities can go on. We can't just kind of stop people from doing something.
Mm. But I presume there isn't an element of review of existing marine protected areas as well, and kind of adjusting protections that are there as well.
Yeah, and I think that's the main focus of this is, yes, activities which can be considered destructive aren't immediately curtailed in these areas, but that's when you think about the resources that various governments have. for all of the policy guidance, really, especially the UN Sustainable Development Goals, all governments are trying to maintain sustainable use of the seas. So that means still having some form of fishing, still having some form of sailing or kayaking or scuba diving, whatever those activities might be. And so to wade in and just stop those instantly when, as Anuschka says, the evidence isn't necessarily adequate to do that, but the MPAs give you the focus where you can spend those resources to develop that information. And then, as you say, there's a review periodically where each of these, particularly within the UK, each of these sites have to be reported on every 6 years to see what the change is. And so we're trying to develop different ways to monitor that or monitor that change more effectively so that we can provide better guidance to the policymakers. So that's kind of where we're at, is that, yeah, that there are MPAs, there are sites. From the outside looking in, it may seem that nothing's happening, but it's a long process to get to a point where you have enough evidence to either say, yes, this thing can carry on without any significant effect on the wider ecosystem, or no, this particular activity has to stop because we've now got the evidence that says that it's having a massive effect.
You know, folks, it kind of seems to me like you are almost up for the mission impossible, because I can only imagine all those. You know, like the big thing about MarPAMM is that it's cross-border and across multiple administrative areas. You know, how you even attempt to manage that, because I guess each of these sites pull in their own way, and especially if any particular area spans across multiple borders, I don't know, I'm guessing, but I imagine it's like, oh, it's them who take all the fish. No, it's them who take all the fish. Like, how you even, you know, try to address this problem, and because it must be incredibly charged politically, and then you try to inject, you know, good old science into that. How you even?
I think that's why the stakeholder engagement is so important here. I mean, you don't resolve things very easily if finger pointing happens. So we need to find new ways of how we actually work together. And part of it is really not only understanding how the marine environment works, but also how the people use that particular environment, because there's nobody there. It's not that we've done an awful lot of that kind of work before. We are not planning our, you know, on land planning has a very long history. In the sea, much less so, and is much less done. And the resources are much less there. There's not a police force zooming about the ocean all the time, checking out everything. So you know, we can start to use more. There is a lot of use of satellite, for example, and boats must have satellite kind of beacons on them to show where they go. And but it's all complicated, you know, as data protection comes into this and who's got access to that information. There are challenges there, but there are some solutions. But we are working on understanding both. Understanding the marine environment and where the species, especially the big species. I mean, Alex's work package looks more at the species that are actually kind of in a certain area because they grow there, you know, like the plants, the barnacles, the small things. But if you're trying to protect the larger species, the whales and dolphins, the basking sharks, the mobile species, of course, you have to work very much cross-border. And yes, the complexity gets larger, but we don't have to do that. That's not the MarPAMM's project. We are a project. We are filling in knowledge, and we are handing that on to the administrations afterwards. That knowledge, and that will be taken on further there. So we are kind of a few years of an intervention where some bits of lacking knowledge is put together that then goes back to the government. That we are not the ones that make the rules. We are just recommending management plans at the end that we've come up with the communities. And therefore, also the administrations play quite a big part in the project. So because it's no point of us coming up with a great solution that the administrations wouldn't want or wouldn't fit them. So there's a lot of diplomacy involved in their science, certainly, and finding ways for all of our communities to work together on the issue, and not so much just representing your personal needs, but understanding that you can meet your personal needs, perhaps also really quite well if you work with others rather than against others in trying to manage that environment that you need as a fisherman, angler, tourism provider.
I think one of the really important parts of MarPAMM is that we are giving people who may not normally have a voice or an input into management plans an opportunity to do that. So as it's been mentioned, there are 2 cross-border regions. MarPAMM, as it's EU Interreg 5A funded, we're in Western Scotland, Northern Ireland and Ireland. So there is a lot of different voices and obviously different statutory bodies. But steering groups in the regions are talking to those in the areas, and people with small voices, maybe people who enjoy walking there or people who are even just part of a village community, they can go, they're invited and they are given a voice. They contribute to what they want to see as a benefit or as an output of the management plans that we're doing for the project. We're writing that down and we're given it to them to review. We also have members of the statutory bodies in those regions in the steering groups so that they can hear what the communities are saying, and they can, obviously bring that back to their own, bodies and say, look, this is what we're hearing. But the steering groups are helping us develop benefit mappings for what each area wants from their management plans. And this will obviously feed back into what we're developing as well. So we're not, again, just creating just one standard template and saying, this is what's going to happen. We're saying, what do you want? In terms of politics or finger pointing, that hasn't really happened because everybody's just glad of giving or having a chance just to say what they want, what they're scared of happening in their area. Again, it's, can I still walk my dog on the beach? We've been doing it for years. Or I love, swimming or paddle boarding in this region. What happens if, more enforcement comes in? I don't want to change my ways. So yeah, we're just saying, okay, you tell us what we want, we will put it together. Everybody gets a voice, not just the big people, and we'll make sure that we can put this together in our plans.
What is happening because obviously stakeholder engagement in any conservation project is probably the key, but it's also the most difficult. What is happening if scientific data and recommendations are, clearly at odds with what local communities want, right? Because surely this is happening. So, let's, I'm making this up, by the way, but let's say we have a fishing community who all, who's doing certain fishing practices, and then you have a hard evidence data like, oh, this is unsustainable, you can't do that. What is happening then? Because clearly you have a conflict at your hands, and then you're risking losing your credibility, right? Because then the stakeholders are like, oh no, they just want to, take away our lifestyle. Is there any mechanism, like what's happening in those cases?
To my mind, a lot of this is about exactly why we take this dual approach of with the stakeholders and the science, because it's about trust development. You've got to trust each other. And we have worked way too much in kind of, as you said, finger pointing. They're trying to do this to me. They're trying to do that to me. If you understand overall what everybody gets out of this, if you're starting to understand what everybody's pressures are, if you're understanding the long-term planning as well. I mean, if I'm a fisherman and I've just invested a hell of a lot of money into a new boat, because I didn't know that probably in 2 years' time legislation was coming in, and I would have invested into a different kind of boat if I'd known that was coming in. So it's a lot about working together from the outset in the planning. And that is what I think will need to happen. We need to find a new way overall of planning our environment, one that isn't just about statutory, but does bring the people in, because it is the people that we can't actually manage the environment. We can only manage the people that kind of do things in the environment. So this has to be very much front and center of it. And the science has to be part of that as well. And people have to understand where the science is coming from, and they have to trust the science. Because otherwise they will just say, oh, it's the wrong data, or I don't see that. I go out there and I see lots of fishes. And so it is about all of us understanding each other's perspectives. And that takes a lot of time, talking to each other, building relationships, building the right kind of relationships, making sure that you really understand each other's perspectives. It's about learning an awful lot about our communities as well.
I think that conflict interface, yes, particularly the T5 work package, which is undertaking all the stakeholder engagement, that's providing a really sound evidence base from the local stakeholders in each of the regions and within the two sites of interest in Northern Ireland and the cross-border in Carlingford Lough. But in a way, the project can be quite conceited about this because we're only getting to that point. It still has to go to the policymakers. It still has to go up. So that, excuse me, that conflict interface or the conflict resolution will come after. And it's not just scientific evidence that policymakers have to take into account. It's the whole range of different factors, even policy itself. If a politician has decided on a policy, or a party has, and they want to pursue that, then it doesn't matter what the scientific evidence says in some respects, because there's a balance to be had. So like I said, we can provide all of that, those the components that would hopefully make that decision easier for the policymakers. But that's why we have public consultations, so the policymakers, once they come up with an adaptation, hopefully where each part of evidence contributes to the best solution, then that goes out to the public consultation. So those people that feel that they would be negatively impacted have another chance to contribute. But the hope is, by, as Anuschka says, trying to undertake this new mechanism where that engagement comes up front, comes up earlier, then the evidence base that's contributing to that policy hopefully comes through in that end policy. So the conflict should be reduced. But it's all shoulds and coulds and woulds. We still have to get through the process to see where we're actually, how it performs, and where we actually are with trying to make this small change in the implementation of these things.
Can you outline what is the timeline of the project? So like entire timeline and where you are at the moment in that timeline.
Well, at the moment we are in the final year, really of getting all the science fieldwork completed. The modelling work that we're using to help inform us from the science aspect of the management plans, that will be carried out in October through to March. For steering groups and stakeholder engagement, we have been slightly impacted by COVID, so most of that's been virtual, and as discussed already, Anuschka and I have been out on location following COVID protocols, but creating films and other media things that we can use to show the stakeholders what the project is doing. And this will help obviously get them more engaged in what the science is doing and what we're doing in their areas. So the fieldwork's being done now, or finished now. The modelling work will be completed then in March, and then we will go on to working on the management plans, and they will be sent out for a consultation process with the stakeholders, so that they can get involved in what we're proposed as recommendations to the statutory bodies. And as Alex says, that will give them an opportunity to review what the science is saying, what they want from their areas, and what we're recommending their local bodies do. And obviously, if they're reading this and putting in their own opinions, that will be fed back into the final draft. The project is due to end in September 22, so there's quite a lot of work still to go ahead, but it's progressing quite well.
Wow, it sounds very very reasonable. And as you're making like a videos and kind of like a things like that to increase engagement, to kind of not be super boring.
Yeah,
and showing.
No.
Yeah, that I think because of COVID in particular, that's become quite important, because we were talking about how important it is to develop trust and to build connections and so on. And I think people in the communities really need to engage a lot more than there have been with kind of all these consultations. I mean, not a lot of people de facto look into their newspaper and kind of said, oh yeah, there is a consultation, I'm going to go along and have long discussions. And then what then happens is that you only have those people who have a very vested interest kind of coming along often to these kind of events. And then it becomes more lobbying kind of thing, because you're representing your industries, and then you don't build this kind of community approach to it. So we do need to get the community much more involved. And that is a slow process. That's a process to which MarPAMM contributes, but that's a societal process that will happen over 20 years, hopefully, that people think, I'm actually thinking that I have a voice and I should be heard when it is about my local forest or my beach, the environment that I live in, so that they will, even if they have no direct economic benefit from it, kind of think, well, why should I go along? I'll let so and so go along, he's got a boat or they've got a tourism business, I'm just the one that walks my dog here. But you have as much right, and you'll be really upset if all of a sudden you can't go anywhere where you go to replenish your spirit, and these people are really important in these meetings to actually help to create that understanding rather than the against each other, because having the entire community there is really important. I think what Naomi was saying about the timeline that we haven't talked about yet, though, is this modeling aspect, because when you're looking into creating plans, you can't just look at now. You have to understand also what an environment's likely to look like in 20 or 30 years' time. And we are going through times of massive change with climate change. So some of the work that we're doing is modeling what an environment's likely to look like in 2050, because legislation is slow. So you've got to put legislation in that kind of takes heed of the future. So let's say you're protecting a species in a certain place. It takes you 5-8 years to get this legislation in. And, 5 years later, actually, due to climate change, the species is moving on because it's getting warmer and it's moving north, and you're now not protecting that kind of right spot anymore. So this modeling kind of tries to anticipate some of that. So you kind of get the feeling of how complex, actually, when at the beginning I said, we all want to protect it, but it isn't easy to do so. And I think we are slowly getting around to really understanding why it isn't easy to do so.
No, like I said, it sounds like Mission Impossible almost, and in terms of this engagement and reaching out to wider community, and like you said, not only people with vested interest, but also like everyday folk. What are the actions that you're taking? Like, so what are the techniques? Or is it like social media campaigns? Is it like campaigns with the billboards? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, I mean,
it does depend on the region. Sorry. We find that what can work in Scotland mightn't work as effectively in Ireland. So in Scotland, we have two regions, Argyll and the Outer Hebrides. And we've got two policy officers that are just, they're designated to work in the Argyll or in the Hebrides. And they work with the community just to get their own voice. And I think they've been great in getting involved in local film festivals to promote the project and what's going on in their own MPA, their MPAs in their own area. And Anuschka, you can correct me if I get the location wrong, but I think Hebrides, they had a lovely video in Gaelic, and where a stakeholder actually took on board themselves to create a video to ask local business owners and recreational users of the sea what they thought had occurred in the past, what has changed now, and if it's changed for the better or the worst, and what they themselves feel would happen if more protection or changes to how the sea use was, if it was brought in, how that would impact them. And it's been great because you're not getting just the one voice and the one, oh yes, it's been horrible, but it's getting better. We're getting conflicting opinions, and it's just wonderful to actually give them that voice to and that opportunity to say, look, we're not all on the same board, but we're all interested in using this area for our own enjoyment, for our own economic use. So for Ireland, we found that Facebook has been very effective, and because a lot of people here use Facebook, so we have a local Irish region Facebook, which we update with posts from the science work that we're doing in Northern Ireland, so that people who go on can see what we're doing in their areas. And we obviously then update it with monthly posts about what's occurring in Scotland as well, so that they can see how wide our work is, and they can also go on the project website and see updated storyboards or updated events and news that the project's doing. And of course we have a very active Twitter account which we regularly update as well. So we are doing as much as we can to get what we're doing out there to the public.
Yeah, I think that's it's part of really society at large doesn't know much about the sea. We're not taught much about it. It's usually not in the national curriculum, although we have, all the three nations that we are talking that are part of MarPAMM are very much maritime nations that have a very strong link to the sea. Still, people know very, very little. That's an international issue. We are living on a blue planet, which is predominantly functioning because of the watery environment and the sea. Yet we know little. But that's something called ocean literacy. That's, again, a UN level kind of activity that is being understood. And again, our project makes a very small contribution to that one. We were going to do quite a lot of school engagement. I actually created we've got one of the species that is protected is a flapper skate, which is the largest kind of skate in our waters. And I actually got somebody to make me a life-size model of a flapper skate that I can take along to school. Yeah. We started this off.
Huge.
And then COVID arrived. Yes, it's fantastic. It weighs about 30, 35 kilos, and we have to carry it. I've got it on a stretcher. When we carry it. We have got the white doors.
Full length stretcher. Yeah.
And
it's huge.
It's a nice thing, but COVID kind of put quite a lot of a spanner in the works with the schools so far. So we haven't done as much of the schoolwork. We're kind of holding it back all the time, hoping that we can rev up. But the project has limits, and we don't know how long COVID keeps us from going into schools. And that kind of experience is simply not the same if you do that online. So this is one thing. Another thing that we are looking at is creating at the very end 3 kind of displays, public displays. Where we have somewhere where people come as visitors or so on, where they can kind of access some of that information, some of our films regularly. We're at the moment considering and start to talk to ferry operators, for example, whether if you're on a ferry that goes over a certain area, for example, in the Hebrides, could you actually on the ferry have a touch screen where you can access that kind of information from our project, so that while you're going, you can find out what's at the bottom here, what happens, there is an MPA here, what is an MPA, what's going on. So we're looking into those. But again, we're a small project. We have a time limit to it. So this is only a small component of what we're doing, but it is an important one that feeds into this global ocean literacy movement.
No, and you hit the nail on the head here that the engagement with schools is super important, and not only with children, but that's a story that I probably already told on the podcast, that one of my friends, her friend is a school teacher, and she showed her photo with the shark that I caught, and she goes like, no, this is fake, like there's no sharks in Ireland, like, and it's like, what, you're a school teacher, like how so I guess even educating perhaps teachers as well is a huge aspect of it. So far, what's the response? Like, do you is it too early to gauge? Like, is it overwhelmingly positive response, or you already have a first, glimpse of people who might be upset about it and kind of hostile to the whole idea that all these damn scientists are coming here and gonna tell us how to live, and we're here for like 60 years,
Well, I can speak for Ireland in saying that we're getting a huge positive response. We have a great project staff who are, cannot stop talking about what they're doing, and it's just the enthusiasm just commutes across to people, and everyone wants to get involved because we're going to them and saying we want your opinion on what we want to do, and they're responding really positively to it, and I can't say that we're getting much negative response, but overwhelmingly positive, and it's just feeds into our own desire to do the best job that we can.
That's excellent. That's very optimistic.
Yeah, we also, some of this is, as we heard, because some of it is also about trust, as I said at the beginning, and so it is about who says sometimes something is as important as what they're saying. And some of what we've been playing with, because it is a research project, is really thinking, okay, if you are talking, if it's an academic talking, what is that compared to if that is somebody that might work for a conservation agency, or if that's somebody who works for a government agency? Will they respond differently depending on who you are? I mean, we are easily a research project, and we are a development project. We are not coming in as the police force that tells, we are not the ones that will be telling them, you can't do X, Y, or Z here. And they know that. And therefore, I suppose they're not really hostile towards us, and what we are and they realize that this needs developing too. I mean, I think nobody can be as naive to think that there's more and more activity going on in the sea. We now have renewable energy. We're looking towards the sea for the energy of the future, and so on. So there's more and more technological abilities to use the marine environment, and therefore there will be more and more activity in the sea, and that needs more management. And so everybody, I think, that operates in the sea is aware of that, and that has to happen. So I've not come across much hostility either. May well be that they are saying grumbly things when we're gone, but not to our faces.
Gotcha.
Well, I haven't seen much negative opinions on social media where you would think they would be. So fingers crossed it continues.
I just think we've ended up for the stakeholder steering groups that I've been involved with in the Irish regions, so both in Northern Ireland and in the Republic of Ireland, it's, for want of a better word, they've been really professional. So we've had really healthy discussions. There have been points raised which aren't just full of positivity. It's, that there are very impactful statements, but it's because that's the forum to get those points across, and I think because there is that engagement, that's why we're not seeing a response from out of the blue or on social media or anything like that, because they've been given the platform to get those points across. So it's really healthy discussions, and it allows allows people to get across their concerns and those more negative points. But the whole point of that is so that those views are counted, and I think that's why we're seeing the positivity in the wider sphere.
That's very good. And so after these parts, as I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, like after these parts, you will formulate recommendations, and then you present those recommendations to authorities, let's say, right? Is that getting that right? Yeah. So do you expect any anxiety mounting once you about to do that? Because I'm not terribly optimistic from the talking to people, like when there is a certain measures to protect environment and so on, they always getting diluted, and like you're expecting this to happen. Is there a bit of anxiety of like, yeah, we have this fantastic plan and we have spoken to communities, and then like, yeah, but economic growth, right? And everything gets is there that aspect of anxiety?
Personally, I think from my side, like I said, we were in that special position where we can offer that advice, and then that's out of our hands. So I wouldn't have any anxiety per se around what happens next, because the project will have made it, and everybody involved would have made their best efforts to provide the best evidence to those people making the decisions, and we're not here to make those decisions, and I'm not sure that any of us would really want to be in a position to make those, because I don't think anybody
you probably should
in that position is going to win. You're always going to lose out, though, aren't you? You're always going to do something wrong for somebody. So either you haven't limited fishing enough, or you've limited fishing too much. And we always come back to fishing, and we need to say there are so many different activities, and fishing's just an easy target because it's so obvious. But as Anuschka said, so the renewable energy campaigns, aggregate extraction, all these other industries which take advantage of the sea, by doing right by one, you're going to be doing wrong by another. And that balance is an unenviable task for anybody to try to strike. But I think we've just got to be realistic with the project can go so far. And then I think the only anxiety I have is about the amount of time we have to write it all up. That's where the anxiety comes in. We're going to they're going to stop paying us at some point, and then we have to get it all out. So.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I think also there shouldn't be much of a surprise coming. So you might get some negativity, but that may come from people that haven't been engaged in the process. Those that have been engaging with the process will have seen all of those, and we are not just putting, we're not talking to people, then create our recommendations and give them to government. You create recommendations and then give them back to your stakeholders for discussion before they go to government. So it's you're really trying to make, not just build trust and then abuse it, but build trust and continue having it, because otherwise it's the next time people will not engage in this process. So it's really important that is the case. It may well mean that some people are upset that haven't engaged earlier, but then they have an opportunity, because this is an iterative process. It carries on. The other aspect I think to consider is that these plans will also, and you alluded to that at the beginning, as we are learning more about what works and as we are monitoring the environment, these plans change anyway. And have to change. The species change, how they move change, and so it has to be a very dynamic kind of approach. And so we are just developing. In some ways, we are in a relatively early stage, and we have a role to play in developing those structures. We're making some recommendations. We're developing some methodologies to perhaps allow us to monitor our MPAs. It's expensive. Boat time is expensive. Going out there with robots is a very expensive activity. We're all, with COVID, we're all having probably a little bit less public money available. So we need to find cost-effective ways of doing that. That is also part of the project, contributing just a little bits to that. It's a big, we're talking about the MarPAMM project, but the MarPAMM project is really a project in a large industry, an international kind of industry, and we've not talked much about the monitoring. That is the other side of it. We are still talking about the establishing of the plans, not yet about so much about the monitoring that follows after.
Yeah, and the monitoring will come later as a part of different project, or is it kind of like an extension of what you're going to be doing in the future?
It's statutory, so then it will be the statutory agencies having to do this. But we are hopefully, or there'll be other projects that will develop more the right kind of protocol. How should you do this? And that's really important to find, because if you have to monitor everything, it's a hugely expensive activity. The more you can define the individual species, for example, that are really important, kind of like thermometers in the sea, that you kind of say if they are affected, then the ecosystem is changing, or if you can measure some chemical factors or something, and if you can find those, then that's brilliant. They did this in coral reefs. If you try and monitor every coral reef and have to go down to species level, that's a disaster. If you can kind of say, okay, we're just managing to kind of go out there and kind of say, okay, we take a quadrat down there and look how much coral is healthy and how much of it is bleached, for example. That's a much easier way around it. And they found in some other environments really good mechanisms to monitor that are effective, and to develop the right kind of monitoring programs is, I think, still a challenge that we are only contributing very small amounts to. If I'm right, Alex, I mean, again, I'm talking a little bit the very big picture here.
Well, but that's it, and I think that's really one of the big strengths of MarPAMM, is that compared to statutory monitoring, is where it's a standalone project, it's not risk-free, but we have much greater liberty to try out these different monitoring methods. So that we've got this component of novel monitoring, and so using SAM's AUV either in the Scottish lochs or in Strangford Loch, as we did last month, to monitor particular features or to see if monitoring particular features is feasible, using baited remote underwater video cameras with the University of Ulster, using the laser line scanner to look at different features in very fine scale, and building that information. Is much easier to do that in a project like MarPAMM than it is with statutory monitoring, because you have to deliver these results in a certain way for statutory monitoring. So what we can do is, hopefully we provide a basis by saying, look, this isn't a risk anymore. Using an AUV to monitor this feature in this environment is perfectly sound. And that increases the efficacy of our monitoring into the future. So that's where MarPAMM influences, hopefully, monitoring as we go forward. Obviously, it's a finite project, so onward monitoring, as Anuschka says, comes back to that statutory basis. But hopefully we can provide evidence for a greater suite of tools which improve that monitoring capability, and then in turn improve the management of all of these areas for every stakeholder. And that's the grand aim. Whether we get there is a different thing.
Yeah. Okay, folks, I would like to switch the gears a little bit and ask you about specific areas of scientific work. Can you highlight what are the I read about the seabirds monitoring and so on. So can you give us a little bit more on this?
I think Anuschka and I have been sort of doing a bit of that round Donegal, filming that this week. We are doing for the seabird monitoring, the seabird work package, we're creating a model to look at the distribution and abundance of key species, and we're incorporating a climate change model into that work as well. So again, as has been mentioned, this will help with future planning for MPAs and management of the same. We've been also trying to use innovative methodologies as well to see if there's better ways of counting birds that are of importance and that are protected within these MPAs. And I think, for an example, we can use, we've been trying a passive, non-invasive way of counting shearwaters using spaniels, and it's been never tried before, but we're getting preliminary good results. It's a lot of field work to create these models, but it is worth it. It does help, towards future planning and future management of the MPAs. The data that we're also collecting will be fed into seabird consensus counts, which are done every number of years to see historically any changes in species numbers and their use of areas. And I believe there is reports on seabird and fisheries interactions to see the impact of heavy trafficked areas on seabird distributions. do herring gulls follow sea, fishing vessels when they're out at sea, doing trawls or collecting fish? Is there a distribution pattern? Do they travel far from their nesting sites to these vessels? Is there any impact on, changes in the vessel traffic to where the birds choose to go? And we're also doing a number of aerial surveys to see just the changes in species abundance in certain MPAs, and seeing, just seeing if that's any reflection on the habitat and vessel use in those areas too.
Yeah, yes, they had a great day out. I went to Anuschka on a little boat where we have, it's an uninhabited kind of little island full of, it's seabird central. So I kind of say there's no people, but you've got shed loads of different kind of wonderful seabirds. And we've got, so there's an old lighthouse there that's abandoned. And in the lighthouse keeper's cottage, we've got at the moment 3 of our researchers kind of camping out and doing a census of this island, just of the birds there, focusing on 3 different species. And they kind of showed me a little bit what they did yesterday. And I was absolutely blown away because I'm a biologist, but I'm not an ornithologist. And I knew relatively little about it. And for me, all seabirds, for starters, I didn't even know that there were seabirds that are nocturnal, that are kind of just flying at night. And so they were showing me yesterday. We were walking along, and there was a dilapidated stone wall. And they kind of say, oh, in here are nests of these stone petrels. And so these kind of guys, and I said, right, they're sleeping in there. And I said, right. And then they had a little recorder. So they actually had you have your Bluetooth kind of, not a recorder, a loudspeaker at their phone. They put the call of these kind of guys onto their loudspeaker and blasted it in there for 20 seconds, blasted. You could well hear it. And then they could talk back. You got out of that wall, you got the call coming back. And you think, wow, I mean, I would have never in a million years thought that a bird kind of is sleeping in their stone wall. Then they showed me the Mount Shearwater, same kind of thing. So another species that's actually a night species. And they live more like in something that looks like rabbit burrows or something. And they sleep in there. And so you go along, you've just got a bit of bracken and ferns and shrubbery, and they do it there. And all of a sudden you think, God, I've been stepping over, these sleeping, rather not very common seabirds. And they have this kind of method for doing this. And then they're kind of talking about also using the spaniels to kind of snip them out. Where are they? Because how do you actually monitor how many of them there are? Birds all look the same. You've got to kind of get them in their nesting, but these guys are in burrowed nests, so you can't see them sitting on a tree or on a cliff. So you've got to find them inside walls and inside burrows. So spectacular kind of work going on. And it really blew my mind. As a biologist, I yesterday came back and I had an epiphany. I'm absolutely into seabirds from now on. So there is some fantastic work going on, and they do this in lots of different places across Scotland and Northern Ireland, because and the Republic of Ireland, because we really don't know enough how many birds there are, and birds will be affected by climate change and where they are, and whether there's this work, how we see them interacting with the fishing vessels. We know that. I mean, even when I drove across in this tiny little boat, we were followed by some birds. Wherever you could see, there were no birds, only where we were. So you can see that there is an interaction between the people that use the environment and the birds. So studying that is something that we just require in order to be able to protect these fantastic looking little things. I mean, the stone petrels, they are tiny little things that fit into your hand, and they make a big fracas of a noise. They get this kind of wall to not quite kind of hum, but it was quite amazing. So they are definitely, I want to see all of these really protected. So it's great project that's going on there, and I hope we kind of manage to get our film across so that we can share that more widely. It's really brilliant.
Yeah, as soon as you have all these things, I'm very happy to share that with my viewers and listeners. That will be awesome. I don't know, Alex, I thought that you want to jump in and chime in.
Yeah, well, we've got a couple of other work packages there. So we've got the marine mammals work package. So that's looking at cetaceans, which are whales and dolphins, and the pinnipeds, which are the seals. And I think those, along with the birds, they're the greatest species to use as an advocate for cross-border management of these features, because you don't have an Irish whale or an Irish whale or a Scottish whale. They have no respect for borders whatsoever. They don't know that this bit of sea belongs to one nation or another. They just go where they need to go. And so those animals are being monitored in different ways. So for some of the seals, they've had tracking devices attached to the seal. That's fine for people that don't know. The adhesive erodes naturally, it doesn't harm the seal in any way, and then the monitors float back to the surface. But they give really good information of where the animals have gone, the temperature of the water, and things like that. And then people can divulge or determine even which activity those animals have been undertaking, whether that's sleeping, basking, just swimming, hunting. So there's loads of different information that's coming out from that. In lockdown last year, we had a pod of orca come into Strangford Loch in Northern Ireland, chaperoned by a well-known male called John Coe, but they're considered resident in Scotland. So from the east coast of Scotland, they come down to the east coast of Northern Ireland, and it was a fantastic event. I think that was probably one of the biggest things that people broke lockdown laws for, was to go and see the orca in Strangford Loch, because it was just such a spectacle. So we've got all of those efforts, and the information coming out of that work package really demonstrates that the marine mammals they're really wide ranging. They have their home zones, their home areas that they favor, but they'll go where they need to go to hunt, or for whichever resources they need. And that's a real good demonstration of the benefits of cross-border management that this kind of Interreg funding enables us to carry out. And then the work package that I'm responsible for is the benthic work package. And that's all the boring and interesting stuff. So it's the tiny worms, it's the snails, it's the things that live in the mud and you rarely see. But then that's also some of the things that people like to eat, like nephrops, which give you scampi.
And that you said like, oh, it's boring, but this is the most important part, right? This is the very bottom.
It is the most important. It's the foundation of the marine ecosystem.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's the benthic stuff and the algae, the phytoplankton. Those are the two important bits. The big fluffy things, or the big, charismatic megafauna isn't where it's at.
Exactly. Everybody loves orcas, like big orcas, but no, these little worms, this is what matters first.
Absolutely. That's where we're at.
Oh man, this is great. This is great. Folks, we're gonna be wrapping this up slowly, but I have two more things for you. And one of them is being involved in that work and in on both sides, both in the scientific research and seeing birds and worms and orcas and all these things, and also seeing the impacts of it, and then seeing the attitude people. We have these big elephants, like massive commercial bottom trawling, salmon farms, all this, and plus climate change on top of that. How you think the future will play out for marine environment? Do you think that the future is bleak, and if we just manage to hang on to some of the stuff that we still have, that will be good? Or you more optimistic and you see like, well, I think that the tide is changing, and even through creation and funding of a project like yours, is that giving you that optimistic vibe? Like, what's your forecast for the future personally?
I might go first, and then Naomi and Anuschka can lift everybody back up. But it's obvious. I mean, we've seen the messages from people like David Attenborough that we are globally. It's not just the marine ecosystem, but we are at a tipping point, and we're in a position where projects like this allow us to develop more information to enable us to take action to change what's going on. But climate change is happening. It's an inexorable process. We can't stop that immediately. We can undertake efforts to stop that gradually and hopefully slow it down, and maybe the systems will recover in a different way, in a more natural way, or respond to those efforts. But the trajectory we're on at the moment is that climate change is going to get more severe, which means the distribution of taxa of species in relation to that is going to become more severe. So things that used to be in one place are no longer going to be there. They may turn up somewhere else, they may not. And we don't know that yet. But we need things like this to raise our awareness more, to raise the data, the underlying data, the baselines, so that we're in a position to influence that change for the better. So I think part of me thinks we're stuck. We've gone too far, but the wider body of evidence says that there's still that hope that we can change it for the better, and that's where we need to go. So we're in a precarious position, but we're in an almost fortunate one. At least we have that awareness to try and make the effort to change it back.
Yeah, I agree with Alex. It's the position that we're in. I think we all accept that changes are already happening, and all we can do is try to find mitigation measures to slow it down and to see what changes are occurring in the species within these areas, and what can be done to try and help them and help promote them. And it is important to get the people aware of what's going on and what could be done to try and help this, to try and reduce the impact. We can't stop it, but we can certainly see what we can do to slow it down. And it's great to get feedback and input from those who want to become involved, who want to keep the environments as abundant, as diverse as possible. And it's bleak, but there's a lot of positivity out there, and that just feeds into our desire to do the best job that we can.
Yeah. No, Anuschka, if you want to jump in and give your view.
I didn't hear what the other said, so I may well repeat myself. It's a big issue for me personally, because I became my entire career kind of choice is because I want to make a difference, and it isn't an easy one. But I think if you're looking at it from the perspective of an environment like the marine environment, I think as we are a bit like the top predators, I think we will be gone, or if it goes really bad, it affects our civilization. I don't even think it'll affect human survival as a species, but perhaps of the civilization and the advanced kind of culture that we have, it will affect species. But if you're looking at it in the long tooth that we look at in evolutionary terms, this is a blip. And you might get quite a large number of extinctions, but it'll open up new things. We will not affect the bottom of the food chain or the creepy crawlies that Alex is working on, the algae, the bacteria. The principle of life will continue. So in some ways, if you love the symphony of nature, I don't really worry. That will continue unless we blow the planet up with a nuclear war. I think life will continue and find solution and find new ways. Anything else will be a question of how it affects the more the charismatic species. The kind of the icing on the cake will be affected rather than the main makeup of the cake of life. So that isn't, as I'm a human, and I have children, that's not as comforting for me as a human, but I think as somebody that loves nature and the ocean and the long-term game plan out there, it is. And I think it is completely up to us as to how much we destroy. And we have to do that communally. And people, human, I think human ingenuity is massive. But we also seem to always do everything we can for the negative as much as for the positive. And so, we are not very good at knowing that if we do X, if you want to start with Adam and Eve, you told them there's one thing you mustn't do, and the first thing they go and do is the thing that they know they mustn't do. And that's a very human kind of thing. So in that regard, I'm not all that hopeful that we won't perhaps have a lot of impact on the environment. But nature is stronger than we think. I think when I was 20, I used to think that we have everything in our hands, and increasingly I see that nature actually has us in its hands, and perhaps we're not quite as powerful as we think.
Yeah. No, I agree. That's kind of my take on this as well, that this is not so much save the planet, let's save ourselves. Planet will be okay in the long run. Folks, anyone who listens to this and would like to track what you do, get involved, be part of the consultation, how they can do that, how can they get in touch, how they can keep track of what you're doing.
We have a Twitter account, which is at MarPAMM_Marpam, at MarPAMM_project. So they're welcome to follow that and leave comments. There is an Irish Regional MPA Facebook page for Northern Ireland and Ireland. So they're welcome again to like that and see what we're doing. And again, we have a project website which we update regularly with what we're doing and any events that are hopefully going to be happening when things maybe return to normal. And if they go onto the project website, I think there's email addresses there as well if they need to contact anyone within the specific region they're interested in.
Yeah, I'm in particular keen if there's any teachers out there that like me to come and talk to their classes. Just go to the website, get my email address, and drop me an invite. And if I can come, I'll come in person. If I can't come in person, I'm happy to kind of do a Zoom or a Glow or whatever kind of platform you're using with your school class. So that's an invite to any teacher.
That's fantastic. And obviously, anyone listening to this, I'll put all the contacts and social media and website in the show notes, so they can go there and. Listen, folks, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure talking with you. And I think that the work you do is absolutely fantastic. Much respect for doing what you do, because it seems like I said, it's a mission impossible. It's a mammoth task, and you working on it with optimism. So thanks for that. If you have any final words of wisdom for our listeners and viewers?
I'm not sure about wisdom, but thanks to anyone who watches this show.
Fantastic. All right, folks. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Tommy. Bye-bye.